Hey everyone, we're going to get started in just another couple minutes here. Okay everyone, let's go ahead and get started here. So hopefully you all can hear me okay and see my screen okay. If you have any questions or comments during the presentation, feel free to type into the chat as well as the question section, and I'll get to those as we go or towards the end depending on how we're doing on time. So welcome everyone to part 2 of the ITSM webinar series. So I'll be your host today, Nick Bellick, the consultant manager here at Syrison. So as mentioned, this is part 2. So part 1 we hosted just a short 2 weeks ago across all the different regions. So if you missed that webinar, no worries. Today's content should still be pretty relevant to you, and you can always catch up on the recording. And I'll show this at the very end today. We have a community post out there with all the recordings for every region, North America, EMEA, and APAC, as well as any code or other materials shown in the webinar. So we have the slides from last session up there, as well as recordings. This session will actually show a run book. We'll show some PowerShell code, some management packs, and we'll go ahead and put everything that we showed here up on the community post at the end. And if you have any follow-up questions, if we don't have time to get to them today, then you can go ahead and post your questions there, and we'll have a kind of an ongoing and follow-up conversation in that space. So a quick recap before we get into today's material. We do have the new Analyst Portal Community app now available. So this is a free web-based incident management app for SCSM. So it's if you aren't a Syrison customer yet, or if you don't own the portal analyst portal portion of the Syrison products, then this is a version that you can try completely free, and it handles incident management in the portal. And we actually covered a lot of incident management during our first session, the first of 3 in this series here. So of course, if you have any questions about this product in general, please do let us know, and we can get them all answered. So in the quick recap of the Analyst Portal Community Edition, it does let you create, view, edit incidents, and a lot of similar functionality you'd see in our full Analyst Portal that also covers service management and change management. and so forth is available for incidents. So you can see all those incidents and let your analysts actually do the work for them. So the self-service portal that's been a community product that's been out there for quite some time now, kind of brings that self-service aspect, that end user aspect of Service Manager to the web, and this allows you to do some on the analyst side as well. So all the lists and filters and searching that you'd be used to doing, you can do for incidents. And of course, if there's any activities related to incidents, and if you're not sure what an activity is, no worries, we're going to cover that today. And of course, dashboards are an important part of any sort of ITSM implementation, and those are included in this Analyst Portal Community Edition product. It's all HTML5, modern, no Silverlight or anything like that, and it's really extensible as well, which is a nice feature of the Analyst Portal products in general. So device agnostic and what you'd expect in something this day and age. So actually, one change I want to reiterate about the community edition of the portal is that it doesn't require a license key anymore. So previous versions for self-service portal did actually require a key, but you can actually get this installed now without having to worry about that key, renewing that key, and so forth. The analyst portal for service fulfillment and change management and so forth, of course, does require the key still. So remote management, control center, and advanced request offering, and we'll see a bit of advanced request offering today. Actually, they do work with the self-service portal, Analyst Portal Community Edition. Remember that self-service isn't just for service requests. We'll see some of that today, but you can certainly have self-service focused towards incident management. So reporting just general issues, or reporting issues of a certain type. Really nice feature to be able to get some of that self-service going to free up a lot of your IT staff from kind of being a middleman between getting the system, getting a very simple item logged. You can kind of have your end users do that directly through self-service, get the right questions answered the first time, and strain on your resources a little bit less. So we'll see some of the benefits of self-service here today as well. So we also do have some tools out there for you to get support for this free community edition. The Cyrusen community is out there, and we'll again see that towards the end. So if you have any questions for other your peers that are using the product as well, and Cyrusen has a strong presence in that forum as well, we'll help you out there in that public space. It's a great place to collaborate, share amongst yourselves, and for us to share with you, and vice versa. There's plenty of really cool stuff that's been published out in the community that I use myself today. So really neat to collaborate in that space. Okay, and we do have formal Cyrusen support as well through support package. If you would like to use the Analyst Portal Community Edition and you require some official support, we do have some packages available. So please contact us if you have any further inquiries on that. So recapping what we covered the first session here, we really got into shifting this mindset from, adopting ITIL mindset. So we might have come from a system where everything's a ticket, or it's just a big queue of work to get done, and there's not really any structure put around it. It's, if there's a ticket, you go work it, maybe you assign it to someone else, get it off your plate, but kind of messy environment to work in, as there's all sorts of different types of those tickets. So by adopting this ITIL mentality, we start to classify those different types of tickets as, well, they're called work items in Service Manager, but that's not super relevant. If everything was a work item, we'd have the same problem. But we're getting more specific by saying we have an incident type of ticket, or incident type of work item, which is something that's gone wrong, an issue, a work stoppage, disruption to your business is going on, and the goal of that incident management module and the processes that you surround it with are to resolve that incident and to just stop that disruption to your business. So we have some processes established, and we talked through some of that last in the first webinar session. So what is incident management according to ITIL, which I kind of just covered, and kind of what does it look like in Service Manager? We get often kind of overwhelmed with buzzwords and all sorts of acronyms in the IT world, and we tried last time to just really show it. This is what we mean in ITIL when we say this. This is what it means in Service Manager. This is where it's kind of realized, and if you're going to log or classify or escalate, this is literally how you do it in the system, and some considerations for how that could be improved upon and catered to your organization. And of course, best practices with Cyrus. So of course, there's always, we provide a lot of tools here with this product, and like I mentioned earlier, it's very extensible. So there'll always be some uniqueness across different organizations and different considerations when working through your own incident management process. So what are kind of some of the best practices and some ways that you can always continue to improve that incident management process through kind of that continual service improvement aspect of ITIL. So we covered that last time with incident management and everything that has to do with that. But of course, that's one piece of the puzzle, the ITIL puzzle. So this section, this part 2 of the series, we're going to be getting into service fulfillment. So we'll be talking about some of the benefits of service request management, service fulfillment, some of the best practices, defining those processes. How do you identify them, log them, get them into the system so they can start to be used? How do those workflows and automation, how can you use that to your advantage to increase consistency, to reduce manual efforts, and get rid of some of those tedious steps that you might be doing now. And then, of course, Cyrus Advanced Request Offering is an enhancement to the out-of-box request offering in Service Manager that lets you add some really neat features. It allows for dynamicness to the questions that you ask. So when we want to get into self-service, we might have 1,000 different questions we want to ask depending on how the end user is answering. So if they want a desktop computer, we might need to ask how many monitors. If they want a laptop, we might have to ask how many. Do you want a docking station? But those questions might be irrelevant depending on previous answers. So it adds some dynamicness to the question and answer kind of part of that self-service. Because we all know if an end user comes in, they see a form that's 100 questions long, they're going to say, heck with this, they're going to call you and defeat the purpose of that. It also, Advanced Request Offering lets you kind of break the questions up into different pages, different sections to make it more of a straightforward user experience rather than a wall of text questions they might have to answer. Even after trimming it down, you still might have a decent number of questions. And also some mapping. There's some really neat things you can do with it to kind of kick off some automation, to format the questions that were answered for your analysts to better assess and so forth. So some really neat features there, and we'll be diving into this towards the second part of the demo here today. Okay, so recapping this, so incident we've covered, part 1. Service request we're covering today. Change request we'll cover in the third of the series. And problem and release management, we're not going to cover in this series. There's not going to be a dedicated section on it, but I will mention it a few times. Problem does really go hand in hand with incident management. Often those are kind of confused for one another, and problem management is really all about root cause analysis, and it kind of goes hand in hand with problem to help fix the underlying issue, whereas incident management is just to get that user back up and running. So there might be a workaround or so forth established in your problem management process that you can then take advantage of in your incident process to help get those users back up and running. And then release management, we'll talk a little bit about that in the change in the third webinar, as far as how those kind of pair up. Your change requests often go hand in hand with a release record. So like I said, focus today is service fulfillment. So what is a service request? And So a service request, it's structured, repeatable, predefined, and low risk. There's not, when we went to the first webinar, we showed a pretty standard ITIL diagram that started off with logging, classification, and all the way through escalation, resolution, so forth. Well, there's not really a predefined, this is your service fulfillment path. Service fulfillment, it's really individualized for different types of requests. So what are the types of requests that your organization handles? And some examples here. Request for a new computer, we're actually going to build that out here in a few minutes. And then just a request for information, or a more kind of advanced offboarding request, which could cover a lot of different things. So each of those individually, they have their own process, their own Visio diagram, if you will, of how that is fulfilled. If someone wants a new computer, this is what they do to get from start to finish. These are all the conditional branches it might take. So that needs to be established for each of those, and we'll see that here in a few to ultimately get that in the system and start using that type of item. And one advantage here is that if you map out, this is our request for computer, this is who's doing what along the way. You have someone go into your system, create a new service request for that type of request. All you do is kind of follow it start to finish, and it's done. There's no, hey, I got a ticket for a new computer, I'm new here, what do I do? It's all predefined. You have the routing taken care of ahead of time, and so forth. And that's all kind of mapped out through what's called activities in Service Manager. So we have 5 different work item types. And in fact, if I go back to the other slide, I won't bother. But you have incident, service. Oh, what's happening here? Okay. I must have hit a hotkey. 1 second. Okay. Okay. So we have, so the actual process to get from start to finish, that's all defined through what's called an activity. And we talked about different types of work items, and I said there were 5, and I lied when I said that, because there are more than 5. There are 5 types in Service Manager that map to ITIL. Service request being one of the 5, incident being one of the 5. But an activity is also a work item, but it's not an ITIL type of work item, if you will. It's more of a supplementary kind of helper work item, in that it defines a single action that someone takes. So a single responsible party or group is going to do this step. And an activity, it can be used within a service request, but it can also be used within a change request, within a release record. It actually can be used within an incident as well. Not as common, but certainly can be done. And really, I mean, the activity, it's an isolated step. So if I were to say, all right, first I have a step to review, and this is the person who has to review it. And then next I have a step for this team to go do something. Then I have a step for this other team to go do something. Well, those steps can be pre-established, pre-assigned to those different groups. And then when the next step is ready to kick off and be completed, that person or group can take on that step without kind of having to worry about everything outside. They want to focus on their particular step and not worry about the whole overarching context of the request, because that takes more time, and that ends up being a little bit less efficient when you need someone to take 20 minutes to get caught up on what's going on. And actually, a great example of that would be an onboarding request, onboarding or offboarding, where you might have for onboarding 20 different steps happening all at once, and that might actually happen through something called like a parallel activity that has manual activities within them. And you might have some steps going for your computer to get set up at the same time as your account to get set up, at the same time as your key card to get set up, and so forth. And those different teams, the group setting up your computer, they don't know or need to know really about the key card setup steps. So you can keep those isolated, not have to worry about, did we get every single thing done? can kind of focus on the world that you're familiar with, each individual analyst and each individual group is familiar with. So a manual activity, it's just a kind of a manual and review activities, we kind of classify them as action steps. They're things that someone needs to go do. So a manual activity to set up a computer or to create an account. And review activities are similar. They're just for approvals. So yay or nay on a particular decision. And one advantage of review activities is that you can have multiple people reviewing. So you could have a group of 5 people reviewing, and you need 3/4 of them or so forth to say yes before it moves forward. Now, parallel, sequential, dependent, those are we classify those as kind of workflow activities. They're kind of like parallel and sequential are kind of like container activities where you'd have different types of activities sitting inside a parallel activity, and they would all kind of go at once. And sequential activities, if you had multiple kind of paths within a parallel activity, you would make use of those to have multiple paths go at once. For example, if I need to set up an email as part of onboarding, I can't do that until the account's set up. So account gets set up, then email gets set up, and that's going on in parallel, same time as computer gets set up. Dependent activities, not used as often, they're a bit more advanced, but really what those get into is if you have an entire service request that is dependent on, if your current service request depends on an entire other work item. So for example, some folks decide to break out like an onboarding request, and maybe there's software that has to get installed in that onboarding request. So there's a whole separate service request to deploy that software. And rather than having that full complexity in one kind of massive onboarding item, it's a way to kind of break it up, make it a little bit more manageable. And runbook and PowerShell activities, those are activities for automation. So they're unattended. They run a script, they do their thing, and then they complete or fail, hopefully complete. So those are kind of unattended. Those are ways that a step can complete without having to bother and strain on your resources to complete something manually. And we'll see example of PowerShell activities here today. Those activities, the function of them is very similar, like the purpose behind them. They're activities that do something in an automated fashion. Okay, so what I want to walk through today is taking that first item off the list, this computer request process. So how would we, as a new organization, adopting ITIL and trying to build out a service fulfillment program, how do we figure out what information we need? How do we get this in the system? So first and foremost, actually taking a step back before even getting in the computer request process, starting point really needs to be, look at what system you're using now, what any sort of reports you have now, and kind of figure out what your top 5, top 10 most common requests are, most common tickets, as you might call them now. Try to figure out what's asked of IT the most. What would you classify as a service request? And pick the big hitters and start with some of those ones that are going to provide you the most value once you work through them. Don't necessarily start with the most complex. You certainly need to get your arms around the system to understand it and get this created, get these created properly and folks understanding how to use it. But find somewhere in that maybe top 5, top 10 something that seems manageable in size and is important enough, happens enough that it's going to provide you value. Don't focus on like a one-off right out of the gate, or something super complex right out of the gate. So when you identify what you want to work on, and I'm going to do a computer request process in this case. Pretty much every organization has something like this, right? We all need computers. So first thing you really need to think about is, well, what happens to get from start to finish? If someone says I need a computer, how do we do that? Who is involved in this process? What are the different steps? And at each of those steps, what do those different groups contribute? Does this need approval? Is there a ordering step? Is there a receiving or a setup step, a deployment step? And lastly, for those different folks to do what they need to do, what information do they need? I'm sure we've all gotten requests before that says, hey, I need a computer, and no other information whatsoever. Or, hey, I need a database backup, and no other information whatsoever. So in order for these analysts that are going to ultimately do these different steps to do what they need to do, we need to know from them usually what information they need. And that's often an overlooked part, and a lot of times reasons why items sit around is we just don't know what we need to know to continue. And another thing to consider with each of these processes is, are there similar processes we can incorporate? So for example, if we sit down in a room and we talk through with all the different stakeholders, we talk through our computer request process, well, we might, what about mobile devices? We have to order and distribute those as well. If we talk through that process and map it out in a similar way, and we look at them side by side, are they the same process? Can we combine them into one, maybe into a device request process instead of separating them out? Or are they just slightly different that they can work together with maybe some compromise between the process or perhaps some slightly different branching logic depending on the complexity? So take a look at everything and try to cater this to, there's no necessarily need to have a completely separate process for 50 different types of hardware, for example. So think on what can be combined, and remember your end user potentially is going to be using this in a self-service fashion as well, and they need to intelligently be able to figure out how to find what they're looking for. So you don't want to overburden them with a ton of options. Okay, so the next step here is to kind of simplify and document the process. So I skipped a step, sort of, and that your organization, it probably has Visio diagrams somewhere, right? And we've seen them before with 20 different paths branching from everywhere, arrows all over the place, all these conditional statements and start branches, end branches, and it's just tough to read. And thorough, certainly, there's no arguing that, but ultimately what we need to do to get this in the system is we need to simplify it. We need to simplify this process. Every service request, if an activity could fail or the request could be canceled, really, and a lot of those kind of rejection arrows that you might see in a Visio that go the other, backwards and so forth. We don't need to capture those here. We want to try to get a linear path here if possible that covers the kind of the high level steps that'll get done. So for example, let's say that our diagram for the desktop team and their setup steps, it's a step to image the machine, and then a step to install software, and then a step to run some diagnostics just in case, and then a step to actually contact the user, a step to go and deploy it, and then a step to update the record or something like that. Well, if those are all steps done by the same team, yeah, you could certainly have 5 or 6 different activities, and you could literally put that in the system with all 5 or 6 of those activities. But typically, we want to try to simplify. That team likely thinks of all of those steps in a kind of a combined fashion and are able to follow their internal processes for how that particular step that their group has authority over. They know how that part is done, and they can tell you when the whole thing is done, and when it's still active, they're still somewhere in that kind of subset of steps. So certainly worth writing out that within this activity to say these are the steps that my group follows. But kind of think of this from the end user perspective as well. We don't want to, the end user puts in a request and they want to know kind of where along it is, but we don't necessarily want to expose them to all of those sub-steps and all that complexity that goes on behind the scenes. Simply knowing, oh, my request is approved. Oh, my equipment's being obtained or being ordered. Oh, my equipment's being set up. It's enough to keep the user in the loop and keep them happy without worrying them or overburdening them with a bunch of details that aren't necessarily relevant or shouldn't maybe be taken at face value depending on what it is. So get your steps in this kind of linear process. So take that complex Visio diagram, take that 4-hour meeting whiteboarding session that you did to map out this crazy process and simplify it, get it in this kind of a fashion. So this example here for the computer request is it starts with an approval. So we maybe talked about it, or maybe we have some existing documentation that says that this needs to be, whoever requested it, their manager needs to approve this. So that can be automated as well. We need to to think about, well, we can predefine that there's an approval step, but what we can't do is predefine who that manager is, because that's going to vary case by case. Whichever different person requests, it's going to be a different manager. So the potential to automate something there with determining who should approve, and then this equipment obtain step. Definitely some automation potential here as well. Obtaining the equipment, we keep that fairly generic here because there's going to be a stock check and all, like most organizations stock some machines, or at least they stock their standard issue machines. So I mean, this step is really check the stock room. Do we have what we need? Do we have what was requested? And if not, order it and spin off that kind of sub process of obtaining that machine. Ordering that machine, excuse me. And so when I say this could be automated, I mean, there could simply be a step, you could utilize the Cyerson Asset Management to track your stock and even say, all right, well, they requested the standard issue desktop and I have all of those current stock machines in the system. Well, let's do a quick lookup. And if we see an available one in stock, we'll skip this step and the desktop team can just go pull that. But if we don't see one in stock, then we don't get to skip this step and we need our procurement team to procure it. So there's definitely potential to automate. I encourage you to start, whatever process you figure out here, it needs to be able to be done manually. You can't automate right out the gate. You need to get something on paper that folks understand and agree, this is the process, even if it's a little bit manual or tedious, this is how it would be done. And then you look at what's really tedious, what's really time consuming, what's really repeatable, and you automate that one component. And then start to slowly improve these different processes and potentially reuse as well. Like this approval step, for example, this is going to be far from the only request that has an approval step in it. So a lot of potential to reuse automation there as well. Okay, so enough PowerPoint for now. I'm going to actually get over into my lab, and I want to show you. So I've built this out in my environment, and I want to kind of show you how this would look translated over into Service Manager. So I'm going to go click on the New button here at the bottom, click Work Item, Service Request from Template, and then I'm just going to go and hit Request Equipment. Okay, so I'm going to hit Apply just to save it. Well, I shouldn't have done that because I need to fill in an affected user first. So I'll do that here quickly before my runbook kicks off. Okay, so I've kind of templatized this request here. I put in the affected user, that's the person who requested the equipment. And that's going to be different, of course, every time. I've put it in kind of a generic title here, and we'll improve upon that when we get into the self-service piece here soon. I've kind of defined the urgency, priority, source, area, some of these fields that are in system, saving some time, not needing the analyst to kind of set those over and over again. And then so the activities I have over here, these bottom three are familiar. This is what was in the PowerPoint just a moment ago, this manager approval step. And right out of the gate, we see that it's empty. There's no manager in that box there, no one to approve it quite yet. And we have a step to order or pull the equipment from stock, and then a step to set up and deploy the equipment. Let me go ahead and refresh this. Hopefully it's run by now. Okay. So we see that so this is the PowerShell activity, Cyerson PowerShell activity. It could also be a orchestrator activity. Same kind of end goal between the two is that it's an automation activity that runs. So it's run, and we'll actually get into the guts of this in the third webinar with change management. We'll get into actually how that's all set up and configured and so forth. And if we have time today, we can potentially circle back depending if folks are interested. But what that step is doing is it's looking at the affected user. It's called end user 1 in my lab, for example, and it's going out to AD and it's figuring out who that person's manager is. And in this case, I have end user 1 and their manager is SCSM admin. So if I expand this RA here, this review activity here, I see that now SCSM admin has been added to this approval step, and this person could then go in here and actually approve it, complete that step. So if I added a different user, if they had a different manager, then that different manager would be added in this review activity instead. So, say if you didn't have any sort of automation like that, you would need a step at the beginning here to say, add the manager to the review activity. So a service desk person potentially looking at this request and verifying it and then adding them into the review activity. And actually, if the analyst is creating it through a template like this, then the very first, before even hitting apply or save originally, they could just put that person in there. But this saves that service desk analyst from having to look that up. It's information that we can easily automate. It's NAD, something we can determine. It's repeatable, so it makes sense to do in an automated fashion. Okay, so very simple request there that makes use of runbook activity, PowerShell activity, review activity, and manual activity. Now we'll go back to the demo here in just a minute, and what you just saw there was using what's called a service manager, a service request template, and activities and kind of setting that path. But what we didn't show is any sort of a self-service element there. So what I just showed you would require an analyst creating that, and perhaps someone calls in relaying that information to you, and as an analyst, service desk analyst, you would punch that info in and save that request. But ideally we want to have a more streamlined way of doing this. We want to have these users request this themselves, and perhaps there's one thing we didn't capture the way I just showed is we didn't capture any sort of question and answer logic, right? If there was, we didn't answer what type of computer. We didn't require answering the question, what type of computer do you want? And those are questions that we need to kind of wrap around this equipment request to make it logical. We can't give you equipment if you don't tell us what you need, if you don't provide a justification or a budget number or whatever else we might need to get you that machine. We need to ask that. So we can ask those questions in what's called a Cyerson Advanced Request Offering, and we can kind of expose that type of request through the free Cyerson self-service portal to allow our end users to create those requests without even having to go through IT to do so. So before even going through this, you make sure you have all those questions. That was part of that discovery step, is figuring out what information that we need to complete this request. And we want to try to avoid overburdening our users, presenting only relevant questions. We don't want this to be overly complex. So try to think about what your users would know, and try to avoid asking some of those maybe internal IT questions that, sometimes there's going to be follow-up no matter what when a new request is submitted. So you're not going to, if you can capture 90% of the cases, and don't get too caught up in the one-offs trying to capture every single possible question or piece of info you might need. But let's go ahead and actually build this out. So I'm going to go back over here to my lab, go into Service Manager, and I already have my template created. And what I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to make the advanced request offering part of that. So the very first thing you need to do before you make an advanced request offering is you need to make the template. The template is simply, it's predefining fields, filling in the title, filling in the classification, filling in the support group, and so forth. It's also defining the activities, the different steps you have to take to complete it. So for the sake of time, I've already done that, and happy to provide that in the community here as well if you want to try this on your own. So once we have that template, we're going to go into the console, library, service catalog, request offerings, all request offerings, and we're going to click this create advanced request offering. And careful not to click create request offering. There is a non-Cyerson, just out-of-box request offering feature in Service Manager, which you can actually use side by side with the advanced Cyerson Advanced one if you like. But the Cyerson Advanced one adds extra functionality, the conditional questioning, the multiple mapping, different layouts, and so forth. So try to point some of those out as we go here. But the first thing I need to do is I need to give this a title. And this is going to be a user-facing title. So I'm going to call it, in this case, equipment request. I can give it an icon if I like. I'm going to skip over that in this case, and I'm going to select a template. I click on this template, and I've already made it and put everything in here with webinar so we can find it easily. So I picked that template, and that's the same template that we use to create this request here. I notice that the management pack is actually grayed out here in this case. I can't change it. You must store request offering and template in the same management pack. So that's something to keep in mind when you're thinking about naming convention and how you're gonna kind of break out your management packs and your different strategy there. Of course, you always want to have an organization name in your management pack naming convention to separate your stuff from the Microsoft stuff. And then of course you want to try to break them up into different high-level types. So for example, you might, your convention might be Cyerson incident service request, Cyerson incident request offerings, or Cyerson service request offerings, so forth. Try to avoid putting everything in every configuration in one management pack. Ends up having it's kind of a bloated, really high dependency management pack that's hard to move around between environments. So if you have like a dev, a UAT, prod environment, the more management packs you have, the simpler that the moving of content between environments becomes, the simpler backing up your environment becomes. So definitely approach that. Before you make any content in Service Manager, make sure you have a sound management pack strategy, naming convention strategy, and so forth. So direct link, we're not going to get into that today, but this is in case you maybe have some like vendor pages or other external systems you wanted to link to that don't go through what I'm about to show you through advanced request offering. You could kind of put that direct link right in here. So form instructions is going to be a user-facing field as well. I'm going to say, please answer the following questions, and I'm going to start asking some questions. So, for a equipment request, the very first thing I think I'm going to ask is, what equipment do you want? And that'll be a required question. We can't really fulfill this request without knowing that. And then the prompt type, I'm going to do in this case query results, and we'll configure that here in just a moment. So let's, I've set up a few different items in the background here, and I want to say that depending on what they select, if they select one of the higher end machines, I'll want to ask them for some additional justification. Perhaps they can ask for a standard machine, and that's kind of doesn't need the justification, but maybe it needs justification if it's advanced. So I'm just going to make this simple, provide justification, and I'll just make that a text prompt. Maybe what date do you need this? Maybe I'll just keep that as optional for ASAP, which is probably the case most of the time. I'll make that a date type field, and then maybe provide a budget number. Make that a text field in this case. And maybe lastly, we'll say how many monitors do you need? And we'll make that a optional field. We'll make it a simple list just to show you some variety here. Simple list. Okay, so under configure prompts, this is where we add some color behind some of these questions. So for what equipment do you want? We need to provide them a list, ideally, of the type of equipment they can have. And so using some integration here with the Cyerson Asset Management product, we can actually create a catalog of the different items that we want to provide and allow users to select. So catalog item is a great choice for this to provide that more dynamic list. Now, of course, you could do a simple list. We'll see a simple list here in a second that just says desktop, laptop, so forth. But that changes a lot. So it's a little bit tedious for your SCSM admin to come in here and have to update that as your environment changes over time, and it's going to change over time. So using something like catalog items, well, if you have multiple request offerings, they could all use that same unified kind of set of catalog items. And a lot of advantages to to using that kind of configuration item type approach rather than just a flat list that you have to update, maintain. So criteria is where you can filter out subsets. So maybe we only want to show some of our catalog items here. In this case, I'm going to keep this open, pull them all in. And then of whatever it does pull in, this display columns page, we need to show some info to the user. So in this case, I'm going to show display name. I also want to show price. And I'm going to call it price. Instead of display name, I'm just going to call it name. Keep these in slightly more user-friendly terms because they're going to see, your non-IT folks are going to see this, and they might not know all these system terms. So options allow users to select multiple. Sure, we'll allow them to pick multiple in this case. And then we're going to add whatever they select to related items. And that's just a service manager requirement. You have to map. Any question you ask, you have to have mapped somewhere. Okay, so for provide justification, I'm going to pop that open, and I'm going to change the size of the text box here. By default, it's a single line, and for justification, that might be a few sentences, a few paragraphs. So I'm going to bump that up so that it just takes up more rows. Date, what date do you need this? Maybe we don't want folks requesting something, a computer today. Maybe we only want to allow them to request it with 3 days notice. So we could do something like this. So the earliest available day you can request it is 3 days after the current time, and then 30 days after. Budget number, I'll just keep that as is. And then how many monitors do you need? Just a simple list. We'll say 0, 1, 2 in this case. Okay, so the layout page is an advanced request offering feature that lets you kind of break this section up. So let's say that maybe I wanted to separate it into, equipment, questions, and then maybe a section for budget and justification. And maybe I want to move this justification and budget section over. So I can actually go over here to add prompt, just double click them, the two that I want to move over, and it'll move them from left to right, hit accept, and then it just shuffles them down. I change the label here as well. Now I can also add kind of dynamicness to these questions as well. So for this, how many monitors do you need, for example? Right now they're all show always, but maybe I want to make this conditional. So I'll change this show always to show when true. And what equipment do you want? We'll say if it contains, if they selected any of our desktops, and these are catalog items I've created in asset management. We only want to ask this monitor question, for example, if they picked one of those desktops. And then for justification, maybe I only need to show that when they picked one of the advanced types. So standard ones they can get without having to justify, but advanced they need to justify. Okay, now for multiple mappings, this is the advantages of this section are twofold. Number one, there's a requirement in Service Manager that every question you ask has an answer, and that answer needs to be mapped to a field. And request offering out of box, that mapping has to be 1-to-1. So if you ask 20 questions, you have to have 20 fields to store each answer. Now, the multiple mappings feature of advanced request offering lets you map multiple questions, as many as you want, into a single field. And then number two is you can format it as well. So for example, my title, as you see my title in the requests I opened earlier, just said equipment request. Well, I think it would be more helpful when you're looking through a sea of work items, being able to have a little bit more information in the title is typically helpful. So I'm going to actually map to the title. I'm going to call it equipment request, and then I'm going to actually add in. I want to show maybe what they asked for here in this section. And then for description, I want to map some of the other answers. So I'll call it justification. I'll map that. Due date, I'll add that. Budget number, and then how many monitors. For now, we'll just say monitors if applicable. And I can't type today. There we go. We should call this number of monitors. So that's now done two things. Number one is we've formatted these questions in a way that's easy to read. Analysts can go in here and look at this and understand what's going on. You might have emails that go out as well. And so this email would now have this information in a nice, easy to consume format. But we've also fulfilled the requirement that every question that's answered needs to be mapped. And they're all mapped in this case to description. Now, map prompts you don't need to use if you're using multiple mapping. That's a part of just the out-of-box request offering, and we have a more robust way of doing that through the multiple. So we go down to publish, and we're going to actually set this to published in this case, and we need to do that for this request offering to show up in our portal. However, that service request isn't going to show up yet. In order for it to show up, it needs to be inside of a service offering. And going back over here to the portal, this is our service offering section here. Well, we have a category, and then this Cyerson Consultant requests, that's our service offering. And then each of these individual icons, that's a request offering, what we just created, that sits inside that service offering. So I'm going to go over here to the service offerings, and I'm going to create, not that, I'm going to create service offering. There's no advanced service offering, by the way, it's just standard. And I'm just going to call this webinar in this case. I'm going to keep the category general, store it in the same management pack, which I'll provide here after the webinar as well. And now under this request offerings section, you need to add the different offerings. So all your request offerings that you've created are here. And if you want to, we want to, I didn't put this one in, did not say webinar for that one. So there, okay, so I add equipment requests to this service offering. There it is. And you can add request offerings in multiple places as well. If you needed to show this in our multiple service offerings, you can do that. But the service offering itself needs to be published too. So request offering published, service offering published, and request offering within the service offering. So that'll get the job done. And in order for this to show up in the portal, you do need to restart the cache builder service or wait 24 hours and it'll get there. So while we wait for that to process here real quick, there's a question. Is there an built-in spell check when creating request offerings? Good question. I don't think so, but I might be wrong about that. And one quick thing I want to mention, careful not to double click. Make sure you actually use this edit advanced request offering task here. Double clicking might open the regular out of box prompt. So I don't, yep, there, it looks like there actually is. So I was wrong. So yeah, it looks like it's going to underline. Should do that in most sections. There might be a few one-off sections that don't, but in general, it does seem to do some spell checking for you. Good question. Not something I've thought about, but that's good. I'm glad it spell checked me for some peace of mind along the way. Okay, so after just a moment here, it's created this second service offering, and it's added, it shows my request offering there, and I can actually click the general category and see my service offerings broken out. This, by the way, the home page I'm showing you here, this is one of 3 that come out of box. Pick whichever one you like. It comes down to a matter of preference, and some of them do better depending on content. Like if you have a small amount of content, some pages just tend to look better. If you have a lot of content, some pages just tend to work with that better. So pick what works for you. And of course, if you ever, and we have plenty of organizations that have built custom service catalogs, and that's certainly something that you can do. Like I was mentioned before, the portal is extensible. You can create anything you want, really. And if you need any help with that, my team, the consulting team here at Cyerson, is ready and able to help you out with that. So please contact us if you're interested in anything like that. So here we have our our request offering, kind of as we just configured it. So the first question we have, what equipment do you want? And if I go maybe and I say I want a advanced desktop, then we see that how many monitors question pops up. If I pick standard, I just did the same thing twice. If I pick standard laptop, it doesn't show up. If I pick both, it should, yep, there it is. So maybe in this case, I only want standard desktop. No, I want advanced desktop. Due date, you see I cannot pick Wednesday or Thursday because that's, maybe we don't allow for that quick of a turnaround time. We pick Friday. How many monitors do you need? Just one. And I can go next to this next page. We've chopped it up a bit. It's not this long scrolling page of questions. So now I'm in a justification and budget mode in my head and filling out because I said so. And looks like we have spell check here, and thank goodness. All right, so now I go ahead and I hit save, provide the budget number, I hit save, and create. So hitting save, that's going to now create this service request, and it's going to use that same template I showed you originally. And here we have it. So we have equipment request, advanced desktop. So it's going to a little bit better information, and when we're looking at this request in a grid, we can tell more easily what it even is without having to go into it. We have some information in the description that might fire out in a notification, and so your notification would have more info in it. And of course, we have all of our activities. And this first one, I don't have a manager, so this SCSM I don't think has a manager, so that won't really add anybody in this case, but depending on who the affected user was, it would add their manager. The logic is kind of baked right into that PowerShell activity here to do so. And everything else here is, of course, the same. And if an analyst needed to go in here after the fact and bump up or down the urgency priority, adjust any of the fields, you certainly could do so. And all of those questions and answers are right here under user inputs as well. Okay. So we've now seen kind of wrapping that service request and into a self-service, adding some self-service functionality around that service request, and some obvious advantages of doing that, and keeping the workload of your IT, keeping them less strained, and answering phones and relaying information into the system. You're making sure that they answer all those questions you require of them, and kind of guiding them through collecting the right information, ultimately creating a service request that has that path predefined. And this eliminates mistakes more than anything. If you get a request for a computer, you're getting the right information, you're following the right path, you're never wondering, what do I do? Or did we do everything I was supposed to here? It kind of takes that training out of it. It lessens the learning curve, especially when you're designing these, you got to try to think, what would a new user to my organization do in this case? How would they know what to do? And by putting yourself kind of in that mindset, you're going to end up building something that will help guide that user through without having to answer a bunch of questions there. So that's about it for today. We have a couple questions I'll get to in just a second here. So I do want to recap here real quick first, and I'm happy to go a couple minutes over here as well for questions, and folks have to drop off. It's totally fine. But in case you missed it, part one, there's a YouTube link here, but there's not really a need for you to type that in. You can just go right to the Cyerson community. So I'll show that here on my screen. So under the Cyerson community, if you go to the videos section, it's right here at the top, ITSM Journey, 3-part webinar series. And so as we go through it, we have the links for each region here. I'll shortly get North America up. Form to ask any questions. If we don't get to anything today, we'll feel free to ask it here and I can answer it. And then code, so management packs, scripts, and so forth. Anything we kind of demo, we'll be uploading here as kind of your central spot to keep track of all this. And we already have a few questions from folks from the EMEA region. Okay, and so if you do want to get started with the Analyst Portal Community app, you can go to cyerson.com/analyst portal community. The Cyerson community, again, a great place to go for that 24/7 troubleshooting. We have customers around the globe, so if you're up late Thursday night troubleshooting some issue, there might be someone up in another region that can help you out in the community. So it's a great place to go to help each other out. And of course, Cyrus, and we're also a global company, so we have folks kind of around the clock that are helping out as well. We have some paid support packages available as well for the community edition. Please just email team@cyrison.com if you have any questions on that. And of course, I'm the consultant manager here. If you saw anything today you're interested in, but just don't have the bandwidth or feel you need a little bit more experience or training to get that done, you can always set up an engagement with my team. Feel free to email team@cyrison.com as well to get those talks going. We can figure out what your needs are and get something together to help you out. So with that said, I'll get the questions here at the end, and part 3 is coming up 2 weeks from today, and we're going to be covering change management to wrap up the series with that part. So hope to see you all then. So that's it for today. I'll stick around for questions. We have a question: restarting Cache Builder disconnects current users. It should not do that. The app pool, restarting the app pool, which is another component to the Cyrison portal. Any version of it has both Cache Builder and app pool. Restarting the app pool would disconnect those sessions. If you have Windows authentication, it'll re-authenticate in the background. If you have form authentication, you might have to relog back in. But the Cache Builder alone, you shouldn't notice anything. You shouldn't have to relog. And then Brian has a question. In order to declutter, we're looking at combining a request a widget and problem with widget into one widget support RO. Is there a strategy on dynamically creating incident or service requests based on user input, or are you forced to, sorry, cut off. Are you forced to always have 2 different ROs? So Brian, are you asking if there's a way to take 2 existing ROs and just combine them into one? Okay, no, sorry, I'm sorry. So you're asking, okay, so when you hit apply at the end of that request offering, it makes a request of a certain type. So advanced request offering, what I just showed you here today, it can make incidents and it can make service requests. It is one or the other, and whatever one it makes, it's based on a template, so it will make it based on one template only. So you can't have like a dynamic at the end figure out what template to use, but that's certainly something that's come up as a requirement. That's certainly I've come across a few times in the past, and how that's often dealt with is, so first off, if you have a service request that just has maybe different branching logic based on what's answered, you find the least common kind of denominator between them, what activities will always be there no matter what request, and then you could have a PowerShell activity or a runbook activity go and run and add the extra missing activities in there. And I've also had cases where folks have had a runbook activity or whatnot that actually closes out a request and opens one of a different type and so forth. So there's definitely options there. And you have follow-up. So we default to an incident and then have a runbook examine, create the SR, close the original incident. Problem we run into is the attachments. So yeah, that's what I just mentioned. Actually, the second thing is closing out the first and opening the second. So yeah, certainly I'm not sure what issue you're going on with attachments, but perhaps you can take that offline if you want to post about that in the community, and we can see what's going on there. But certainly possible to play with the attachment. Attachments are a tricky one, but certainly possible. And then Matt, we have another question. If we modify SR template, what happens to data associated with the old template? So you're able to, so if I go in now and I update that request for a computer template, it'll update, stay associated, and work just fine in the advanced request offering. It'll still be mapped and still work there. The one way that you could break that potentially is, like, let's say I made a service request with advanced request offering. Sorry, I made an advanced request offering with a service request. It had some activities. If I mapped to some of those activities, and then I went back to the template afterwards and deleted that activity, you might have some mappings that would be undone. You'd essentially break it in that way. You'd have to add those mappings back for it to work again. But certainly something you could recover from. But just in general, adding an activity and so forth, that won't affect anything. It'll work just fine. Cool. Okay, so I don't see any other questions coming through now, and we're a little over here. So if you do have any other questions you think of here after the presentation, again, feel free to go to the community, post about them there, and we'll get you some answers. So thank you all for joining me today. Hope to see you all in a couple weeks when we wrap up with change management. So thank you all, and talk to you soon. Thanks.